And so much of leadership activity has a social aspect to it. We should be able to have the shared reflective conversation. The language is difficult. I know in the Prometheus journey, I thought that if I worked at it hard enough, I could come up with a set of language that would be sufficient. And then I came to the position that we end up having word clouds that are sufficient because none of the language is exact enough to actually get all the meaning. And the language we should be using needs to fit the context that we're in. Each of those contexts have different languages and different understandings. So I use the idea of code switching, which is a social cultural concept in terms of economic class differences. It's the same, I think, for leadership. You need to be able to talk about the same thing in the way that's appropriate to the audience that you're in without losing that coherence or that continuity.
So Tom, would you be, let's say this group hypothetically met 10 times for 10 hours or 20 hours. And we ended up where we began, which is what you're very correctly saying. Essentially, leadership means different things to different people in different places and at different times. And that the word cloud, which I think is the expression you use, that is the fuzziness and differences inevitably seem to outweigh the similarities. Would that be a finding or a conclusion of this enterprise that would disappoint you because the coherence that you're seeking, we couldn't come up? Let's say we're all quite smart and we're quite in our different ways, different experiences, but we couldn't come up with coherence that you're looking for. Would that disappoint you, or might you someday ultimately conclude that the quest is futile? Differences outweigh the similarities and that they always will.
I hope we could find a word cloud that provided enough of coherence that people could communicate with one another and could be reflected. And
so I guess there's two things. I think using different words, I think especially in this world where we're crossing boundaries, we talk to different audiences, we sometimes have to use a different term just to reach another audience. I'm not sure we necessarily have to change this. If you think about, we'll probably learn better if you say things in different ways by trying to get at the same meaning. In a session in a business school, you use a case, you discuss a case, you try to get at the same message in different ways, trying to convey the same message. I think that's powerful, but I think there needs to be a coherent framework. You can put in different terms and we could be fighting over certain terminology, but I think having a framework or categories that are similar and that you can subsume different experiences on that, they pop up and you can see those commonalities. I think that's very important. And I do agree that often there are many frameworks and it's too many frameworks out there, and that makes it more difficult.
And it may not be such a bad thing. Perhaps, maybe just to echo what Sebastian's saying, I mean, we might be underestimating the ability of the target audience to understand, especially if the concept is real and it's something that they've encountered or they can envisage themselves encountering. Not having exactly the right words doesn't necessarily spell disaster.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same as all of you, where there's this really deep, rich sense of knowledge that exists in the academic literature and the practice of leadership. And then there's these wildly different contexts, as Tom was using that word, as I understand it, all these different situations. And what I find to be the thing that you need is that bridge, that interpretation. Call it coaching, call it implementation, but that's the contextualizing weak spot. How does someone with this deep knowledge and richness of understanding of what has worked and what the research suggests, applying that to the context people can't do it. They're the ones that need the help. So where did you get that middle ground from?
Yeah, and I guess it depends a little bit what we understand as a framework. So if it's a framework where we link what leads to something and what's the outcomes of the typical framework we're working with, then I think here we might have some troubles and we can discuss that. But if it's about what is the core, what do we understand that a good leader would have to bring to the world, then I think here we should try to get closer to that. And I also believe there is a reality of the good leader out there. practical wisdom. For me, a good leader has practical wisdom. This is a very old concept. Aristotle came up with that. And it means in the end that you are able in messy situations where there are different legitimate interests to come up with a good solution. But of course, that's not easy at all. And we might all have a little bit a different core, but in the end, I think the core should be where we should come close.
Can you codify it? Would you be confident in that simplistic codification passing the stress tests? I guess that's what Prometheus is trying to do, somehow boil down to the most simplistic codification or easily interpretable codification.
Can I just piggyback on the point? Actually, I want to piggyback on 2 points. One is your mention of the word context, which I totally agree with. Some of you may know that I never talk about leadership anymore or write about it. I'm always systematizing it. That is, to me, it has 3 parts. One are the leaders. Second is to elevate the followers, the others, to equal importance. And third is to elevate the importance of the other 2 contexts. So I always talk about the leadership system, which is leaders, followers, and context. I never know how you can talk about leaders without talking about followers, without placing the leaders and the followers in the contexts that they share.